If social media companies collectively hate someone, that someone is going to be Donald J. Trump. And after all, they have a pretty good reason for it. I think that the ban of Donald Trump from social media can go as far back as, say, probably the day after the Capitol riots earlier this year, in which a bunch of right-wing nutbags stormed the Capitol and apparently attempted to do an insurrection. And he was banned after that because of his role in it. Now, I think that was a scary day for the bourgeoisie. I think what happened was they realized that those right-wing nutbags that they had been fomenting for decades, all they needed was one narcissistic cult leader in order to corral them into a major political force that threatens what facade of democracy there even is under capitalism. And I think the threat to that facade is what precipitated his ban from social media. Out of fear, most companies that banned him did so on January 7th, the day after the riot.
We love you. You're very special. You've seen what happens. You see the way others are treated that are so bad and so evil. I know how you feel. But go home and go home in peace.
The most significant of all the social media bans, probably the most famous, has been the one from Facebook. Now, they took him down after he essentially showed that he was a threat and the part that he played in the Capitol insurrection. However, according to Facebook's policy board, a quasi-independent entity, they're going to renew that decision after 6 months and decide if he should remain banned from Facebook. Within 6 months of this declaration, Facebook must re-examine the arbitrary penalty it imposed on January 7th and decide the appropriate penalty. This penalty must be based on the gravity of the violation, the prospect of future harm. It must also be consistent with Facebook's rules for severe violations, which must, in turn, be clear, necessary, and proportionate. In many of the Facebook pages that have been permanently banned, I think that when discussing them, the word clear doesn't really come up when you look at the reason for the ban of a lot of these pages. However, what's very interesting here is that the policy board had some interesting words for Facebook regarding the indefinite ban of Donald Trump. In applying a vague, standardless penalty and then referring this case to the board to resolve, Facebook seeks to avoid its responsibilities. It would seem that the policy board, the semi-autonomous body, feels that Facebook should have stepped up and made the decision themselves instead of trying to pass it off to the policy board. Now, the Vice President of Communications, Nick Clegg, for Facebook, did actually respond to this comment in a blog post. As we stated in January, we believe our decision was necessary and right, and we're pleased the board has recognized that the unprecedented circumstances justified the exceptional measure we took. We will now consider the board's decision and determine an action that is clear and proportionate. In the meantime, Mr. Trump's account will remain suspended. Needless to say, for the time being, Donald Trump will remain zucked. Well, the question is here. Can Trump ever return to social media? Well, certainly in theory he can, because there is no federal law or any kind of authority that says or has ruling over all the social media sites that says that he can't possibly return. So this means it's up to the individual social media site to decide whether or not Trump is allowed on their service or back on their service, whatever the case may be. However, given that, I think it's important that we take a brief look at some of the social media sites and their official positions towards Trump. Here are some places that he'll never return to. Twitter permanently suspended Trump's prolific personal account @RealDonaldTrump on January 8th. He had over 88 million followers at the time. Snapchat permanently banned Trump's account on January 13th. He had amassed more than 1.5 million followers. In other places, he's only received a temporary ban and theoretically could return. Facebook indefinitely suspended Trump from both platforms in the wake of the January 6th siege on the Capitol, citing risks of additional violence. The company's oversight board ruled Wednesday that the suspension can stand for now, but directed Facebook to re-examine the penalty, which it called arbitrary. YouTube will indefinitely suspend Trump's account in January, but CEO Susan Wojcicki has said that the account will be reinstated once the risks of violence has decreased. He has roughly 2.8 million subscribers. Twitch indefinitely disabled Trump's account in January. He had more than 1.5 million followers. And there are some places that we do know that he can go to right now. Trump does not have an account on Parler, but news reports indicate he discussed joining the platform after being booted from other sites. Trump does not have an account on Gab, but the company created one under the tag @RealDonaldTrump that archived Trump's tweets. And at least one social media site, I think the question is just a little bit more complicated. Trump does not have an account on TikTok and has not been banned from the platform, but as president, he pushed to ban the platform in the US, making it an unlikely landing spot. So having said that, why wouldn't they want Trump to return? There's an increasing concern about social media by the bourgeoisie, and more importantly, the security surrounding it. If we have seen anything as a result of the Capitol protests, is that we've seen social media can be a tremendous place for organizing assaults against the government. And I think that's truly what it is the United States government fears in this situation, is this kind of violence being repeated. Now, should we consider these people as being capable of overthrowing the U.S. government? Absolutely not. But the violence in itself is a threat. Because one of the things that capitalism always has to struggle to do is make itself appear as though it's a democracy. And when you have something like this that is so extreme in terms of threatening that image, well, they're certainly going to do something about it. And it's not just merely Capitol rioters, but people who are organizing against the government in general. Simple, peaceful protests, simple anger directed at unjust policies that have taken place. Many of them quickly banned are the anti-war voices. And the ability of these ideas to spread quickly from one person to another, and the ability to organize these ideas, develop them, and have them turn into protests and actions, legal or not, against the government, represents a very serious risk in this situation. And that is why there's always been a very contentious issue between social media sites and the U.S. government. For the most part, for the longest time, the government had a very hands-off position where they didn't do anything unless it was explicitly illegal, in which case both the social media site and the U.S. government were united on that question in general. But once the gray area began to build, where you had people doing completely legitimate, lawful things to protest government and its actions, well, this made things a little bit more complicated. You see, social media companies don't mind if you criticize the government or you even express that opinion, because then you're using their site more and they're making more money off of ad revenue. However, this undermines the interests of the bourgeoisie and the so-called deep state, which is really just literally the interests of the capitalist class. So there's a need to restrict it. So you have the profit motive of the social media companies on one hand, and you have the interests of the bourgeoisie on the other. So I think that conflict is really what drives this whole situation and makes it such a contentious issue. And that's why there's so much tension between both U.S. government regulators and social media, because they have conflicting interests, which is a part of capitalism, competing interests among the bourgeoisie. A lot of bourgeoisie would like any criticism to disappear, whereas social media would like to let a lot of criticism flourish because it's good for their bottom line. So that's what we're really facing here. And we know in the end that the U.S. government is going to win, because it's the U.S. government that can control what does and doesn't come through the internet in the United States, for the most part. I'm sure there's many ways around it. So that's probably something that we can look for in the future. I think a lot of these companies just banned Trump outright because they were afraid that if they didn't, the U.S. government might use that as an excuse to get public support behind putting greater regulation on their companies, and that would hurt their bottom line. So I think that very much so in the future, we can probably look forward to much more hostility and coming contradictions between social media, whatever bastion of free speech there is left, and the United States government regulation and interests of the other section of the bourgeoisie. Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.